Hey guys, boy have I got a big one for you today. In this video, I interviewed the legendary Hanshi Patrick McCarthy. So last week I was at the Koryu Uchinadi Kenpo Jutsu Sohonbu Dojo in Brisbane, where I had the chance to train with my KU brothers and sisters, and we did a lot of hard training and enjoy some fun and laughter and some food and whatnot. Now I also had the honour to interview Hanshi Patrick McCarthy. For most of you he needs no introduction, but for the rest he's the world's #1 karate historian. He's the collator of the Bubishi and a pioneer of application-based karate, including the habitual acts of physical violence theory, the kata evolution theory, and also bringing tegumi to the world, which paved the way for other prominent karate people like Ian Abernathy, Jesse Enkamp, and Vince Morris. He was a competitive champion. He's the leader of the International Ryukyu Karate Research Society, an author, a very sought-after seminar instructor, and I'm honoured to say my sensei as well. Now you're going to want to strap in for this one. You need a pen and a paper and get ready to pause or rewind because there's a lot of content. So, without any further ado, it's my absolute honour and privilege to introduce Hanshi Patrick McCarthy. It's an absolute honour to have Hanshi here with us today and take some time for me to pick his brain and ask him a few questions. So, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, Hanshi.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for having me. Oh, actually, we're having you.
Yeah.
This is Home Dojo. Welcome
right.
to Brisbane.
Yep.
It's not your first time here, so.
That's right.
I'm not sure what you have planned for me for question-wise, so we're kind of winging this. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, you often talk about your BFOs, the blinding flash of the obvious. That's when, for those who don't know, that's when the light bulb goes off and you get that sudden realization. And I wanted to ask you that prior to you coming up with some of the deductions that you have as you were learning through Richard Kim and Kinjo Hiroshi and those people, what were some of the biggest BFOs for you? What was the big light bulb moment for you?
The acronym itself, BFO, came about, you have one epiphany after another, and then, I have that type of personality where I like to come to see the best with the funniest and everything if I can. It's I thought, standing there one day, working in Tokyo, and you may remember I was a sparring partner with, well, in those days we were called UWFI. The head of our gym, which was the Snake Pit in those days, was Takara Nobuhiko, and we were basically catch wrestlers. He would then move on and purchase Pride, and then go on to continue his career in MMA. I, of course, took the job to come to Australia and ended my days there. But being in the stable with those guys, and working outside of the traditional world, I was constantly shaking my head in disbelief, watching these catch wrestlers, submission fighters, if you will. Everybody lived together by it. So they, in the morning they do the road work and they come back to the gym and weight train or hit the bag or do their daily training, and everybody gather for lunch and take a rest in the afternoon, watch some fights, talk about special techniques and so on. And then in the evening after training, I'd see, and we were not in a cage in those days. This is late 90s, or late 80s, early 90s. I would see them doing movements by themselves, for the lack of a better description, kata movements, and I would say, guys, I thought you didn't know anything about karate. They go, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, oh, that you're doing these moves, that's obviously a move from a kata. That looks like Nai Hanshi. Well, my favorite, of course, was the Basai Dai, And I said, that's Basai Dai, for God's sakes, mate. What do you mean you don't know kata? He goes, Oh, Patrick, I have no idea what you're talking about, but really all we just did there was I'm in a clinch, and to support my balance so it's not displaced, I put a grapevine around, which is my leg hooking around your leg. And then as I do an overhook with one arm, I'm shoving your face back like this. Instinctively, it's easier to shove a hand rather than pull, agonistic versus antagonistic. So I shove your hand off, I hit you with the elbow, I wrap the arm around your neck, I now have you in a semi-guillotine, and then I force the hand up like this, and by the time it gets, I don't even get it to 12, and you're tapping or you're falling asleep. And so these types of epiphanies, during that, I like to refer to as a very embryonic period of my study, just kept adding up and kept adding up and kept adding up, and it was like the so-called straw that broke the camel's back. I finally went, it can't be this easy. Now this is all during the years that I'm looking to better understand the depth of kata, and how, this is before I stumbled across the habitual active physical violence theory supported by two-person practices, i.e. eliminate the defensive contextual premise, ritualize it into a solo composite, and then by virtually linking those composites together, you got something greater than the sum total of their individual parts, and therein lay, or lie, what the kata truly represented. So it never really meant to teach you anything. It certainly culminated the lesson you should have already learned in a two-person application drill. Yeah. So those types of epiphanies led me down a pathway, led me outside the traditional world of karate, allowed me then to explore the depths and the ambiguity of the Chinese arts, Southeast Asian arts. And then the next epiphany, as I remember really quite clearly, was, I'd wrestled in high school as well, and I was out on a trip, and a friend of mine was from Estonia, and I remember him talking about the great wrestlers, Hackenschmidt and those type of guys, and I remember thinking, oh, I have a book in my library that's written by a guy named Hans Telhofer, was an old guy, and who'd done medieval compilations on different Western fighting arts, rapier, blade, dagger, buckler, but I wasn't so much concerned with the weapon arts as I was with the grappling techniques. And then of course there was Nicholas Bedler as well, who would, like Telhofer, had also done some medieval compilations on understanding those. So when I started looking at those Western style fighting arts, although the garments were different, and certainly the hairstyles and stuff like that, I said, you know something, these postures are not much different from what I was looking at when I was looking at Koryu Uchinadi or the old Jiu-Jitsu schools. And I remember specifically Kanoji Goro's book on Jiu-Jitsu, 1895, before Irving and Hancock and those people. And I started contrasting the figures in there, because remember, it wasn't motion picture then, although Pathé Pacific has changed that for us, but yeah, they were photographs. And I was starting to contrast those with these Western, and I said, yeah, I'm just going to kind of pull a rabbit out of a hat, and I'm going to go look at some of the old Greco-Roman stuff and the pancreation. And presto, all of a sudden it just happened, it was like at work, and I said, you know something, this is like a blinding flash, blinding flash of the obvious, for God's sakes. We only have arms and legs, and irrespective of the color of our skin and the language and culture, we're all the same. And the mechanics of our ability to move are governed by the same immutable principles. And that was that moment, and I just went, oh, very well. And so it was from that time that it was the last, because I kept clinging on. It had to be, first it had to be my style, and then it had to, well, at least it had to be Japanese, it came from Okinawa, so, it had to be Okinawa. And then I went to Okinawa, but it wasn't there either, and I said, well, it all comes from China, so I went to China, Fujian, Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong, and well, Shaolin Temple. Well, then with the Shaolin Temple, and I mean, I was so enthusiastic. I was so crazy about this stuff. I remember at one point around 1989, 1990, a colleague of mine was an archaeologist. Said, "You would be really fascinated to find out what they've just unearthed in Egypt." It was a discovery made many years ago, but they're just now investigating. It's called the Beni Hassan Temple Tomb. It's one side of it, there's a complete, they dug it out, there's a complete illustrations of a fighting art, and there was all kinds of occupation, weapons, and so on, but I was principally concerned with the empty-handed side. What do? Get on a flight, fly to Cairo, take the boat down the river, get off at Elmenia, take the camel ride in, just to stand and look at the stuff. That's how crazy I was about stuff like that. And you know, it's funny now making the deductions based upon that abstract. It was so difficult for me to look beyond the obvious. And now in hindsight, everything's simple in hindsight. And it's funny, I often get a kick out of my detractors who, it's kind of like the Arthur Schopenhauer 3 stages of tooth trick, when you uncover, and I love Joseph Campbell's quote, every generation produced people who, in an effort to keep their traditions a living contribution for the community that they serve, reinterpret the common principles upon which the tradition rests, and in spite of the lip service paid to my style is better than yours, it's just more innovative ways of doing the very same thing. So when if you're bold enough to introduce something that's kind of a new way of doing an old thing, for enemies right away, according to Machiavelli, you're going to have all those guys who have fared well in the old ways, but now that you've tended to supersede, Occam's razor, if you will, KISS, to find a simpler way to achieve the same competency, you're going to be ridiculed, and or opposed, and then finally in the end, if the opposition and the ridiculing doesn't work, and depending on what the nature is, that can also become violent as well. If they go to the next one, which is self-evidency. We know it before him. And it's amazing how many people know the stuff that I brought forward before I did it, type of thing. That was completely obvious. And I suppose one of the great things about the internet these days is everything's time-coded, so it's not so difficult to look backward to say it didn't. I get a real kick out of, there's a guy out in the UK who was I was at a seminar one day teaching some techniques, and go, I learned those from so-and-so. He was the founder of Tegumi, and I went, oh, it's wonderful, so. They say imitation is some form of flattery, so anyway, I may have jumped off the topic a little bit. But epiphanies, BFOs, it was a pathway like the Pied Piper, the breadcrumbs, although not well planned out, but the end result. And I got to tell you, if I could just say one more thing for your students who are going to be listening to this, it's interesting when you make a discovery and you think, I'm a Canadian kid from the east coast of Canada, not anything special or anybody special, that I would be able to come up with something that would help change the way people look at an older tradition. I mean, I can remember in the early stages, I'm like, I better not tell anybody, better kind of keep that to myself, because, that's not a good thing to do. And by the time, there was an executive member of the World Karate Federation, who's also president of the Australian Karate Federation, who recruited me to come to this country. He had the eyes to see in those days. He said, McCarthy's, this guy's way ahead of his time. He's got some stuff that's really going to help us change the way that we look at this. I can remember being a little bit apprehensive about being so out of the box in those days, because I realized if I was saying, look at the, in my studies, tradition is not about, hiding the master's ashes in the box, or, according to the studies of the old school that I have looked at, and quoting Newton, standing on the shoulders of these giants, i.e. reading and studying their work. Tradition wasn't about that at all. Tradition was about continuing to study that which the pioneers were seeking to uncover. And that constant ability to generate something new from something old is what tradition represented. So, but that's not what the common understanding is within those other traditions.
Yeah.
It's always conformist based. If you're not doing what you're doing, you know, we're going to have a word with you type of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. It probably leads really well into my next question, which is Koryu Uchinadi it's sometimes criticised as being against Japanese karate or modern karate. We sometimes get this, you know, your karate bashing or Shotokan bashing or whatever it is. So if your contribution is predominantly in the area of application-based karate, the direct question would be, are you against sport karate?
Oh my goodness, no, not at all. I mean, beside the fact that many of my best friends are world leaders in the sport of karate, and that I spent the first 20 years mad and passionately chasing my identity on the tournament floor. If someone's telling you Patrick McCarthy's not or doesn't like sport karate, you tell them that they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I think if it had not been with the sport of karate, we probably wouldn't have this conversation today. So sport karate, but let's keep things in context as well. There are two sides to this coin. One is the art, and the other is the competitive arena. Karate can also be several other things. It can be a wonderful lifestyle. It can be a form of self-defense. In fact, as you well know, going through our instructor training program, one of the questions on it is, what are the 5 things that it can be? You know, it can also be an industry. And my joke used to be maybe it was the oldest industry, but then I realized, no, it might have served to protect the oldest industry. Jokes aside, no, my goodness, no. Sport is, you know, any form of adversarial training, and really look at the essence of adversarial training is not really fighting another person, unless you're looking in a mirror. You know, that's where the real enemy exists. But no, I'm not. I'm a very pro sport, and I'm very familiar with all the arguments. Oh, look what happened to judo, and you know, I understand that as well. But no, I really believe that if there is any medium best suited to deliver our tradition to a wider audience, and if it's not sport, please come and show me what is.
Yeah.
So no, I'm a bit advocate of it, but at the same time, I'm keeping the balance. At my age, certainly my fitness level these days, the sport of karate is not my principal interest.
Yeah.
But I'm very interested in working with the sport, and I have wonderful liaisons with sport leaders around the world.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, of course.
So
sorry. You asked something about, you know, because Koryu Uchinadi focuses a lot on application practices. You've been criticized for this and that. Not jumping. First of all, I know in Okinawan karate. Here, let me kind of clear up that myth for everybody. There's really no such thing as Okinawan karate. Karate is the product of the Japanese Budo community during the 20s and 30s. From around 1917 until December of 1933, when the Dainippon Butokukai ratified and sanctioned a brand new Japanese tradition called Karate Do, not the styles of it, just Karate Do as a generic practice. There were 8 or 9 people who came up from the mainland, haphazardly, with the exception of Funakoshi Gichin, who was actually physically invited up. Let me just see if I can remember them off the top of my head. I wasn't practicing this for the interview today, but we would have had Matayoshi Shinko, Ima Shinken, Motobu Choki, Funakoshi Gichin, Mabuni Kenwa and Miyagi Choji came up in 28, Chitoshi Tsuyoshi, Toyama Kanken, and Uechi Kanbun. Those were the 9 best known. There are others, but those are the best known who would then leave a footprint on the sands of our tradition, a meaningful footprint, as I will, haphazardly introducing their interpretation of this highly eclectic and symbiotic foreign fighting practices that were introduced to Okinawa over a very long period of time by lots of different people and for lots of different reasons, and some of which have fell quietly dormant, and other people have will never know that once existed. Largely from Fujian province, China, but also from Southeast Asia and so on. So, you know, without a big dissertation, you know, after Japan made the transition from feudalism into modern times, let's leave it like that. You might say, no, not at all. For coffee, we'd kill. Are you kidding? Seventh down. Thanks, Peter. Okay, we're talking a little bit about something that's so important, but it's either overlooked, ignored, sadly not even understood by most people. Those 9 people who came to the mainland haphazardly offered instruction in something that would become ultimately very popular. You know, my teacher's was my Okinawan teacher was Kinja Hiroshi, who died, you know, in his 90s. I can remember something he said to me many years ago. He said, you know, no one, more than we Okinawans, were surprised that this practice, this discipline, ever became as popular as it ever did. It was mind-boggling. But it was the Japanese and the weight, the political weight of Japanese Budo culture, largely Kendo and Aikido. Kendo and Judo, through the Danaponbu Tokugai, that influenced these Okinawan individuals to look at wearing a gi, using the Dan-kyu system, adopting the belt, changing the ideogram that referred to something foreign, i.e. Chinese. I don't need to explain what the discriminatory issues were between Japan and China at the time, excuse me. And then finally, to get rid of that Chinese ideogram and get rid of the jutsu or the application facet, to become more in line with Japanese Budo culture and what we call, what's now called Michi, or the way, which is, this is something that a lot of the listeners will not understand, but I would implore you to look it up if you get a chance. Something called Shushin, Kokutai Hongi, and Nihonji Ron. Nihonji Ron means the uniqueness of the Japanese people. Kokutai Hongi means national polity, and or actually better said as Meiji no Kokutai Hongi, which was the Meiji period base of national polity, and Shushin, which means the blind worship of the emperor. You see, so during this period of radical military escalation, they had transformed. And by the way, I mean, you know, in Okinawa, in the old schools, I mean, grappling, what is referred to today as the clinch, fighting down or up, or percussive impact, head, elbow, all widely practiced in two-person drills in the old days. But those are not things that were interested by the Japanese during the period of time during this transitory migration. You know, Judo and Jiu-Jitsu handled the grappling, so there was no need for that. The Japanese had the sword, there was no need for weapons. I mean, really, when you look at what karate represented, it was really a little more than just the punching and kicking and the kata, you know, which would then serve as an adjunct for physical fitness and social conformity, which would serve the war machine. So when we talk about, okay, it's Okinawan karate, karate is a Japanese tradition. It's just as simple as that. That it has roots in Okinawa, and that Okinawa was a melting pot for other traditions coming in from China and Southeast Asia and so on. See, that's the wonderful thing about Onko Chishin, studying the old to better understand the new. So when people would say to me, "Oh, that's not his," they really don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. And interestingly enough, is when people further get down the path to realize that the destination is not the goal in the first place, it is the journey, they kind of lighten a little up on taking themselves too seriously, you know. And I always welcome the detractors who want to come back online and say, you know, I should have listened to you 20 years ago or something, you know. And what I found really fascinating is a lot of those detractors from, say, the 90s or early 2000s, who vehemently criticized me are now being complimented for doing the very same thing,
Yeah.
by the way. So
Yeah.
it's, anyway. So.
And that's true. I mean, it's become a very popular pastime now, whereas obviously back then it was fought, and now it's become the new trend, those application practices. The question I wanted to ask is something that's pretty obvious to me as a Koryu Uchinadi follower and follower of your movement. It's pretty obvious to me, but there's some others that might be watching that it's not quite so obvious to. For those that don't actively follow Koryu Uchinadi as a stylistic art form, and I'm careful with those words because obviously we know that it's not a style, it's a collection of concepts and principles. But for those that don't follow that movement per se, what then becomes the value in the IRKRS for those people that maintain their existing stylistic expression?
I didn't even ask him to ask me these questions. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. He did ask me in the earlier, do you want to read the questions? But because we're in the middle of a gush, I didn't have time. But great question. Okay, if I lose my train of thought, bring me back, okay?
Sure.
It's interesting, when I started, my very first seminar I was still living in Japan. Terry O'Neill, Fighting Arts International. Remarkable martial artist and just a beautiful human being. Calls me. I had been writing for his magazine back in those, in the 80s and 90s. And anyway, long story short, he invites me to England. My very first seminars are thanks to Terry O'Neill. I'm ever so grateful for that early recognition. That said, people in those days where they never saw this stuff before, and there was mixed emotions and mixed opinion, of course. But most people can say, "What's this style? What is that? What's that style? What's this?" And I go, look, it's just a kind of a collection of my independent research in an effort to find a link back to, back to the future, if you will, to coin a phrase. And, oh, yeah, but what's the style? And my God, they wouldn't let off. And I tried the best I could do for 1 or 2 years, to say, nah, it's just a collection of old stuff. Because as soon as I said it was Shotokan or Shito or Gojo, Rue, and then it would have been then anybody, and I knew that too very well. I was very mindful of, as soon as I said it was this, everybody else would hate it, who weren't that.
Yeah.
And as long as I kept making sure it was generic, everybody would be fine with it. Yeah. Because everybody was having BFOs, the Shoto, Shito, Wado, Gojo, everybody was going, wow, this, that's this, that, that's And so we were all happily living in bliss at that time. And I remember talking to Kinjo Sensei about it. I said, that's very troublesome. I don't know what to do. And he said, I have a great solution for this issue. And I said, what is it? He goes, well, just tell them what it is. It's old school practices. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, he said, in the old days, we used to kind of refer to ourselves as inside people, uchinatsu. Uchinan is people. Uchinan is the same writing for the Okinawan. And especially, Okinawans living outside in Hawaii or South America would use these terms. Uchinanchu. Uchina is the abbreviation, and te, and we know te in the old days referred to the fighting arts, because we remember Junsoku, father educator from Nago in Okinawa back in the 17th century, had a wonderfully famous quote brought to us by Nagami Shoshin back in his early books translated by Shinzato Katsuhiko sensei. And it said, it's not enough that your character and that your fighting is strong, but it must be reflected in your daily behavior. And so he was working with troubled youth at that time, and he used to use the martial arts, or the fighting arts, in the same way that say boxing, for example, in Ghetto was used as a vehicle to become a better, stronger individual, find yourself, if you were. And so I thought, Uchinate. No, that's not good. Uchinate is not good. Doesn't sound good. He goes, say, what? And Kinjo Sensei says, Uchinadi. Yeah, that sounds good. And he goes, if it's old, we say ko. And if it's a stream, we say ryu. Koryu Uchinadi. That's great. But I remember at the same time, I was also, as you know, I'm a swordsman from the Tenshin Shorin Katori Senpo Ryu, Sugi no Ha. And I remember saying, oh, I remember the Koryu community, they're very, you know, they're very sensitive about, you know, people another fake or phony, you know, I'm like, oh, Jesus. I couldn't come up with a better way, you know, but so I wanted to make it perfectly clear that this is not from the 19th century and handed down through a mokoroku, through some jigiben tradition to get, and I'm like the 27th headmaster or something. I said, no, I said, this is me taking old school practices and systematizing them into a fundamentally simple to deliver system. And the Koryu in this part is not meaning ancient art in that traditional sense, the way Japanese Koryu is. It's merely meant as a label, a descriptor, if you will, that Uchinadi that we're doing is not style based. It's old school based. And I went, that's great! They're really going to go with this. That's fantastic. And so, as soon as I said, we're practicing, yes, our style, Koryu Uchinadi, oh my God. Then it was, you know, where's the headquarters school in Okinawa? Where's it? And you know, some people who knew my background, they knew where I'd been, what I'd done. They followed it since the time from the 60s, the tournament floor, the 70s, the dojos, the research, the translate. They were good with that. But it was the, you know, the guys who knew nothing. They, you know, but they had an opinion on everything, you know. And I was a bad guy, and that's not what my teacher told me, and that type of stuff. And so, and then one guy, oh, no, his teacher's Okinawa, but they realized, oh my God, he's an Okinawan, but he lives on the mainland of Japan. What would he know about Okinawa? And you know, of course, Mr. Kinjo, who's probably until the time he died at nearly 95 years old, was one of the most revered old school practitioners, you know, and only now is the depth of his, you know, he would say to me, Patrick, I don't exist. I'm not interested. I'm passionate about this. And of course, you know, he wrote more books in the latter part of his life simply because of the pressure than he ever did when he was a younger man. Anyway, the moral of the story, if you will, is this. Koryu Uchinadi was never meant to be a style of karate, ever. It's still not meant to be a style of karate. It's meant to be a systematized body of application practices linked back to the habitual acts of physical violence, which know no politics. They don't belong to in Taekwondo or Goju and shit. No, they're just, because of the human body, its unique function and common anatomical weaknesses. This is what can be done to it. And then if I look at what's being done to it, I can say, oh my goodness, your limbs can be used like, I can use leverage with it. Category 1, 2, 3 levers. I can use your spine. If I throw it on a body and pounce on you and grab your head from behind, I can make it like a category 1 lever. And the other 4 of the 5 ancient machines, the wedge, the pulley, the fixed axle, this is how the human body works. And those principles that support this applied science, they're not made by me. I mean, maybe we should call ourselves Isaac Newton Rue or who said it best? Give me a place to stand and a fulcrum and I'll move the world. Archimedes. So why aren't we calling Archimedes? So these principles, these acts of physical violence, they've just been around since human beings have been around. And as long as it's on this planet, it's always going to work the same way. Now there are variables, you know, age, size, gender, all that type of thing, you know. And those are the variables in application practices. But the 2-person drill phenomenon, you learn it in passive resistance. And for anybody who doesn't follow that, I don't really care. I used to care, you know. I was like, in my youth, I used to care. Well, the older I got, I didn't care. Now, in this age, they're not talking about me in the first place. I don't care that they don't support it. Let me put it another way, because we're talking about safety. The nature of what we're doing is physical brutality. It's violence, okay? So, but let me change the context for a minute. Let's say that you were a parent, and you had a young child, male or female, and it was time for your child to learn how to ride a bicycle. It's not the 50s anymore. You don't sit them on and shoot them down the hill and say, hey, how you doing, you know? Now we get the little elbow pads, the hat, the little training wheels on the trike or the bike, whatever, and the empowering conversation. Oh no, Judy, you look, oh my, oh, you're doing it. And then, you know, after, you know, you can't tell what the length of time is before a child gains the competency to go without wheels and you know, go around the block with no hands. But that pathway is the learning process, okay? And that's why you work with your child. And in the same way that in physical competencies, you use passive resistance to gain a familiarity. Now, once the familiarity is gained, then it's a gradual to exponential investment of aggressive resistance to test the veracity. And that, of course, with line drills, oh yeah, it's like Kramer in karate, and I love the one. Yeah, I'm taking karate now. Keep beating me, but I'm going to get that guy. And by the time they all go down and see Kramer, it was like that 7-year-old kid who was beating him up, right? Everything works against a 7-year-old kid, everything, or everything works against passive resistance. And don't forget, quoting the very wise and Zen philosopher, Mike Tyson, everybody's got a plan till they get hit in the head with a left hook. The aggressive resistance becomes the study. The failure, the mistakes become the lessons. Funny how pain has a thing of doing that, right? But you're still working under relatively controlled circumstances as you continue to escalate with... So, of course, the ultimate, if you just follow the breadcrumbs down, is to be able to gain functional spontaneity or functional competency without knowing what the guy's going to do, And it's interesting, now I'm so happy, at least with one thing with the MMA world, is that, when you go to a BJJ dojo or BJJ club or a MMA gym or something like that, because everything's resistance-based, the guys who are rolling on the ground or just standing up doing cage clinch or something like that, they're testing the veracity of their function immediately. Yeah. They don't have a solar representation, of course, like we do, and hence the art versus the sport, and but something about that tells you right on the spot that's not working. Yep. And the internet and YouTube is dotted with. Okay, attack me. Go ahead, attack me. Go ahead, just throw a punch at me. No, not that fast. Oh, no, good. Throw it. No, that's no, throw it. Yeah, and then once it gets here, there's this big conversation about the 300 things that you're capable of doing, and it's sad, really. Yeah. But interestingly enough, people are still buying into that. Yeah. So, anyway, Koryu Uchinadi is a systematized body of practices that can fit, really, in my opinion, under the foundation of any tradition. Breathe life into it again, make it highly functional and totally empowered without ever risking damaging its cultural heritage or legacy, and certainly not damaging its cosmetic appearance of the style. So that, in a nutshell, is what. And it's interesting, I see folks say, we'll say Shotokan, forget. I see people study Shotokan, but they won't practice another style. But they'll happily take up, say, Matayoshi Kobudo, or Yamaniru Kobudo, or Ryukyu Kobudo, you see? So there's no problem having Kobudo in the dojo with Shotokan or Shitoru or Gojiro. I'd like to say to those people listening at home, there's also nothing wrong with taking Koryu Uchinadi in like you would take Kobudo in. It's no threat to you. It's a way of empowering an otherwise a tradition that no longer has functional applications to the kata that have been passed down in your tradition. And that's what they wanted to say.
And then to circle that out, is it fair to say that the IRKRS as a organisation is the academic backing that underpins that Koryu Uchinadi movement? So that provides the historical context and the biological studies and so forth.
I have a student in Quebec. Comment ça va, mon ami, Marie? Regardez ici, s'il vous plaît. He came to our seminar first in Montreal, and he was, whoa, I want to do this. He went away on a vacation, I'm not going to say where, and he bumped into somebody who was from his own old style, who showed him a couple of things, and he came back with, oh, I'd much rather do this from my style than do the ridiculously long two-person practices of Koryu Uchinadi. And I read that and I said, I thought he understood. Learning a 50 or 60 or 70 move two-person drill that's not the purpose of the drills. The purpose of those very long drills are to culminate the individual lessons that you would have learned on a daily, weekly, and a monthly, and possibly even a year. It usually takes around 2 or 3 years maximum to learn the amount of techniques and traditions and combinations and variations on a common theme Just give an example for it. Let's say a clinch against a wall or a desk or whatever variations. A big person can do this, a little person can do this, but because of those circumstances, you might have to do something else. So we might work say, one type of, say, under the arm, a front clinch or bear hug, if you will, or from the back side, whatever happens to be. 20 different ways from Sunday with all kinds of variations, although the central theme remains the same. So you might have worked that for a week, 2 weeks, 3, a month. You might have worked. You might have gone away on a vacation, come back. You will always still work that. But once you've gone through the learning process, and then you've gone through the practice, to get rid of it, to make it yours, then what can you can train. So if you say do, for example, our Kansatsu Waza, which is a joint manipulation limb entanglement, yeah, there are 72 parts to that drill. But if, say, you didn't know it yesterday and I taught it to you today, that's not the purpose of the drill. The purpose of the drill merely culminates the weeks and months of practice that you should have done. So when I hear somebody say, once again, they've misunderstood it.
Yep.
And I say, take the time to spend a little bit more time on reading. There's that wonderful Bunbu Ryodo. And all of the pioneers, Miyagi, Funagoshi, Mabuni, they all said, if your art is just physical, it's going to be reflected in your attitude and behavior. There's no question about it. Might's right, and and usually it's very short-lived as well. You may 5 years or 10 years, and I practice this, that shit's no good type of thing. But find me a person who balances their physical training with, and I don't want to say, when I say non-physical, I don't just mean academic or scholastic or intellectual, but I mean philosophical, holistic, pedagogical. The things that, I love Carl Sagan had a great, the late astronomer had a great definition to the word intelligence. That which there is to know. There's no end to learning, And interestingly enough, the more you learn, it's like reading a book a second or third time. Oh, jeez, I never got that the first couple of times I read it. So there's always something else to learn. And I just gotta keep shaking my head against people who won't take that in. And another thing, just while we're on the theme, and I know we gotta get, how's the time, by the way?
We're at 1:24. No,
oh!
Sorry, one time difference. 2.
Oh!
We have plenty of time.
We're good. The one thing about this is this stuff is, it's do you ever hear a guy, if I would have known that when I was younger. They always said, if it's real estate or investments or banking or girls or whatever,
Yep.
If I'd have known that when I was 20, I'd have never done that. Hindsight's better than foresight. Folks, I'm telling you, I'm not trying to force you into anything. I'm just telling you this. If I can see any further down the road, it's by having stood on the shoulders of giants. When I was still young, in my 30s, I did the unthinkable by going outside my style and starting to explore, cross-train. Bruce Lee was a big influence. That didn't sit well with a lot of people, and I've been attacked by everybody. At one time, I thought people were giving out a prize, My detractors were so adamant at one time, if I could walk on water, quoting the Iron Maiden, it's because the bastard can't swim. I got it from everybody.
Yep.
Those folks are all pretty silent now, though, interestingly enough. Many of them are doing what they were criticizing me for. But look, the International Ryukyu Karate Research Society really started off as a very small little group of people, like-minded, interested, all from different traditions, interested in pursuing the same common goals. And we got together, and we were a group that my original guys came out from the Japan Martial Arts Society, JMAS. And I was asked by those guys back in the early days if I would become the admin, but I have nothing against, Aikido or, Koryu, Joe and stuff like that. I love it, actually, but I just wanted to focus my attention morely on, with karate and Ryukyu fighting arts. And so that gave, leaving there, and that tradition, that organization felt quietly dormant anyway, led me to ultimately form our group informally. Yep. And it really wasn't until I came to Australia. But I mean, Joe Swift, Mario McKenna, all those guys are very well-known researchers. They were all my original members from Japan. And then as I came here in 1995, I opened it to basically I opened it to Australia. And then of course in May of 1996, when we went online, I opened it to the world thinking, oh, you know, in 30 members, or sorry, I don't think we had 20 members to tell you the truth in total in Japan. You know, because it's very transient, a lot of foreigners coming through Japan in and out for 1 or 2 years doing post-grad work or something like that. In academia, we never had them for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And so then 20 people would become, you know, 200 people and then 2,000 people and now 20,000 people in 50 countries, you know, so it really exploded. A lot of people are interested in what we do. And that's what the IRKRS does. It's an organization that brings like-minded people together in pursuit of common goals. That's what we do, by the way. It just so happens to also be the parent organization for Koryu Uchinadi.
Yeah.
And a lot of people get that mixed up from time to time. And actually, the Koryu Uchinadi part is the smallest part. It seems to get the most exposure, but it's the smallest part. Most of all of our members are not from Koryu Uchinadi. They're from Shotokan or Shidaru Goju or something like that. And we have colleagues all over the world who embrace our practices to strengthen their own tradition.
I'm conscious of time, so I just had one final question, if that's okay. You spoke before about that wonderful quote about standing on the shoulders of giants, and that was us to see further down the road. And I think back to how you would see Kinjo Sensei and those before him as the giants for you. And obviously for us that are following your movement, you know, I've had people come to me online and say, oh, I love your stuff. And I go, well, same thing, right? So that's attributed to yourself and Kinjo and everybody before me. So for people like myself and the other Koryu brothers and sisters, that giant is yourself. So my question
Thank you, by the way, for saying that. No, thank you for the caring and the sharing. That really means a lot to me, and I want to tell you something. I kind of grew up, I was very lucky to grow up with the instructors I had, you know. My early judo coach was a remarkable person. My high school wrestling coach was you know, it was always about the athlete, you know. Richard Kim, you know, I fought with that guy tooth and nail, but he brought the best things out from me. Kinjo Hiroshi was the same thing, and Wally J was my jiu-jitsu instructor. And, you know, I always took great pride in saying, I learned this, by the way, this practice comes from Professor Wally J. He's still on my shoulder right now. Hello, Richard. I always cite the source.
Yeah.
But I grew up not expecting to. I was just taught that's good manners. It shows good breeding.
Yeah.
Now a lot of I don't do that every day because of my students all know where it came from. But when I see people out there teaching the stuff that I've popularized and they've learned directly from me, and then passing it off as if it was their own, I have a problem with that. Yeah. Now, admittedly, it's a pet peeve, okay? Yeah, I mean, I don't usually publicly say things about it, but I got to tell you, I mean, you know, that says more about their character than it does about anything else. And I think, you know, I kind of shake my head. There's a lot of those guys out there. One that I know is really popular started his entire career pushing my stuff.
Yeah.
Nowhere do I see us being recognized, and I see that as a character flaw. That we threaten their insecurities, because it's kind of like this in the business part about what we do. The commerce part is like, well, if they knew it came from Pat McCarthy, what's stopping them from going to him directly? Is what I think about it. But isn't this, I mean, let's just hypothetically say you're my teacher, but you've been exposing me all, and you tell, oh, that came from Wally J, that came from Richard Kim, that kind of, and I go, wow, fantastic. Well, I mean, I wouldn't mind to meet those guys and certainly get a lesson with them if I have the good fortune to do so, but I'm not leaving my teacher because, man, this guy is such an open-minded guy. Thank you for being so open-minded. I mean, that's the way I think. And so when I see it the other way, I just go, why? Yeah. Sooner or later, you know, I'm somewhere teaching this, I'll say, la la. And so when I started developing these Tegumi drills and actually taking the name Tegumi out from lost annals of time and then massaging it to fit these two-person drills, because Tegumi is not the two-person drill. Tegumi is an old form of grappling used in Okinawa, but you know, I use it as a name because of what Te and Gumi mean, to label this systematized body of crossing hands, if you will. You know. But now look at the word Tegumi is commonly part of our trend, you see?
Yep.
But when you look up Tegumi, I don't see anything. This is Patrick McCarthy, thanks to his research, brought this back in. Yep. And then the coattail jumpers have used that to forward their own campaign, so to speak. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah,
does that sound too
no.
self-serving for me?
No, absolutely. It makes complete sense. And I guess for me that's important, and I do see that not happening a lot, you know, and as I'm trying to work through my journey, it's important that I remember to continue to do that and cite the source.
My apologies for interrupting. I always thought remaining connected to the source ensured continued growth in the future. That was the way I grew up. You know, it's like if I graduate, if I got my degree in this, I graduate, it doesn't mean I got to send money back to my professor in the Faculty of Health Sciences or something like that. But I'd like to stay connected to the alumni, for example. I mean, who knows what I'm going to learn 20 years down the road from other discoveries that are going to be. It's just, for me, it's just common sense.
Yeah.
All those guys, all those Okinawans I met, the Japanese, great guys. Well, there may have been one or two bastards, but they're all basically nice people. Eat, break bread, have a drink, socialize, talk, train, interview, always happy to share things. I never had a problem with any of these guys. And if somebody said to me, I have a responsibility as well. And if somebody says, you know, I want to follow this tradition, I always say, what for? What do you mean, what for? Well, are you looking for functional competency, like, say, self-defense? Or a cultural recreation, or just a pastime, or, yeah, I mean, what do you want from it? You know. Oh, I mean, I live in a really dangerous neighborhood. I want my... Okay, well, you might not want to go with that tradition then.
Yeah.
Because that tradition focuses largely upon this pathway. And that pathway handed by that generation to this generation, they don't embrace practices that example what goes on in reality. And then as soon as I'm able to then quantify it, they go, oh, I see.
So thinking about how, as I mentioned, standing on the shoulders of giants, and clearly for you, you had a pathway in mind. And what I'm curious...
No, actually, I didn't. I didn't, actually.
Right.
That's, you know, I actually didn't have a pathway in mind. I now have a pathway, and I have a pathway. One of the features of the International Root Cardiac Research Society, for folks who are looking for new homes and transitions in styles, I have a wonderful pathway to be able to help you. And the pathway is built upon certain competencies that are all able to be assessed according to the criteria and tested against these other competencies, which lead down a pathway that gives you functional competency. That's what the pathway is about. If a pathway doesn't lead anywhere, then I can guarantee you one thing: it's not paved with physical conditioning or intellectual cultivation or spiritual nurturing. And you need those three things on any pathway to conclude this even balance in the physical and the non-physical.
Yeah. So is that then your legacy? Is that we all want to essentially leave this world better than the place that we found it? Is that how you think that you might achieve that? Is, you know, when the time comes 50 years from now that we look back and say, oh, that Patrick McCarthy guy, is that how the way you'd like to be remembered for leaving that behind?
I'm not really concerned with that, to tell you the truth. I used to be very concerned with that. I want to leave an important contribution. But judging by what I, in my mid-60s, have seen about human nature, I would, and especially in the industry part of our tradition, I'm not so sure. Even if I accidentally fell over God's gift to humanity tomorrow, I'm not sure someone would even leave my name associated with it down in the future. That's just the ambitious and competitive nature of people in the business part of what we do. Yeah, I would like to think that I already feel very grateful that I have been able to help people, and those people whom I have helped have been very vocal in reassuring me that they have changed their opinions about things. That's enough for me. Yeah. I'm completely happy with that. I was most concerned with being able to provide for my children and enjoy life. That's, I think that's, you know, one of the, I think the big secrets of life is finding out what you're good at.
Yep.
And then when you find out what you're good at, you give it away to somebody else, you know, and you know, but because you have to put bread on the table and pay the bills and get insurance and put people into school, you got to make a living as well. So I don't do karate to make a living. You know, I make a living to do karate, if you will. Yeah. And all of the really, and I really think teachers are, you know, underrated, and I think they're probably the most important mechanism, if you will, in education throughout the world, because it's teachers that make tomorrow. And most teachers I know who are passionate about what they do, they don't teach for the income, you know, they teach for the outcome, and that's, so I'm happy with that.
Well, I think, you know, from our perspective, myself and the people down in the dojo right now, you know, we're very grateful to be able to share that with you, who are waiting for us. So we're going to wrap it up there. I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time. It's a real honour, and I appreciate you.
Tell your listeners, go ahead.
Yeah, so, look, guys, the amount of value in just a short chat like that, although not so short, I guess, it's just insane. So we're very, very lucky to be in this position where we can hear directly from Hanshi McCarthy and hear some of the stories that go into supporting the background of what we do, supporting the background of this tradition. So I hope you got as much value out of that. I know I'm going to be watching this to hear it back 2 or 3 times and make a whole bunch of notes. So I recommend you do the same. Thank you again, Sensei. I appreciate it so much.
Thanks,
and,
everybody.
We'll see you on the next
Good
video.
luck.
Thank you.